Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Store Hero podcast. Today, I'm joined by e-commerce veteran David Lockwood, co-founder of the Tapestry Agency in London. David, really great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
No worries at all. Do you want to start by giving I suppose I'll start this with everybody's, how did you get into e-commerce? How did you get into data analytics? It's always an interesting story. Everybody comes from different angles.
Yeah, so I started in kind of before e-commerce, really, which makes me exceptionally old. So I started in direct-to-consumer in 1998. And the company I was working for, a company called Dream Direct, at that point didn't have a website selling transactionally. Not many people did, but launched the first one there with them in back end of 1999. So I've kind of been there since the inception of e-com, and made some of the very crazy mistakes that lots of people did in the very early days of throwing lots of money at things that we didn't know whether or not they worked. But through that, I worked there for 10 years, went on to work for the Cotswold Company, furniture brand, and then Direct Wines, who own Lathwaite, Sunday Times Wine Club, and then latterly Bowden, the fashion brand. So having worked through a series of brands, and in each of those, discovered that generally there was an awful lot of data available, and frequently it wasn't necessarily being used as well as it could have been, which meant that my marketing hat turned frequently into an analytics hat to how can we better understand what the customer's trying to tell us through how they're transacting and engaging with us, and that led me down the road of analytics. But certainly in the last 2 or 3 companies I worked in, I was marketing director, but with a very significant data hat on.
Okay, really interesting. It'd be interesting to even start from the start. I mean, starting with a business, I suppose the first one there when they didn't have an e-commerce website, that first venture into it. I mean, my family business at home has been e-commerce for nearly 20 years at this stage, and that was 2004. I mean, back in the day, we had a hard time convincing people that we weren't a scam. You know, going back 5 years previously, you know, buying stuff off the internet, it's not like, it's very much commonplace today. We accept it as the norm. It very much wasn't. Was it just as much education as much as advertising back in the day? And how did you even advertise? I mean, this is before Facebook and Google were even around, really.
Yeah. So we did some partnership advertising. So we did a bit of advertising with the likes of Times Newspaper Group or Guardian or whoever who already had beginnings of trusted web platforms that people were using and people were engaging with. And therefore we were able to leverage the trust that was given to them into trust for us. We did some paid for display advertising that was awful. Spent a lot of money for no return. But back in those days, we were joining things like Which Web Trader, which was one of the kind of first schemes that tried to say you can buy from these people and trust that they're not going to run away with your money. So yes, it was trying to find as many different ways as possible to leverage the trust that people already had in other brands to go alongside your brand. But certainly in the early days, a lot of people using our website were using it instead of a fax machine. They were just using it as a way to place an order. So they'd seen us in all of our offline advertising and went, oh, I don't even have to pick up the phone to these people. I can just use their front end to place an order, which was great for some people. It meant they could order kind of whatever time of day or night they were free and easy.
So for someone like yourself who was involved in data analytics like 25 years ago, what was it like when the Facebook Pixel was launched and you could run PPC campaigns and you could actually, you know, that old phrase, 50% of my marketing works, but I'm not sure which 50% it is. Like, that was true for a long time. And then all of a sudden you could track everything. What was that transition like?
Not as clear as I might have hoped.
But it still isn't.
No. Well, the problem always came that if you're doing a whole load of Facebook advertising, but you're also doing a TV campaign and maybe a bit of press advertising and some brand search and maybe a bit of display, what's actually getting people to Facebook in the first place? So how are people interacting with you in the metaverse, in Meta's environment, because they found you for the first ever time through Meta, or are they using that as another part of the advertising journey that you have with them? And that's where it gets really difficult. So yes, it made it clearer in some ways, but in fact it helped clarify the confusion and complication in others. It helped clarify the fact that, okay, I can now say that with the Google Pixel, I can now see that I've got 150 orders through this channel, but I still don't know how they came about through that channel. Was it just because of all my efforts through that channel, or was it because the combined impact of my efforts through multiple channels?
Definitely a good help, but it's still not telling you the full picture.
No.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, again, with all these things, it's better than not knowing it, but it's not as good as knowing more about it.
No, really, really well put. And in terms of, I suppose, the types of brand that the Tapestry agency works with today, would you be able to give me a quick insight into how you guys operate today?
Yeah, we work with everyone from relative startup pure plays, so people in a purely e-com environment turning over. I think the smallest company we've worked with was about 2.5 million, up to, I don't know, the likes of WH Smiths, who are really quite a big retail player, as everyone knows. I guess the majority of our client base is sitting 20 to 40-ish million, some on the multiple hundreds of millions, several on the single-digit millions. But actually, in the main, it doesn't matter the size of company you are, you're having the same problem. And the problems are that e-com or direct to consumer is inherently a relatively straightforward business. You've got it is inherently relatively straightforward. You've got a pot of customers who you're trying to sell more stuff to, and then you're trying to get more customers engaged with your brand and stop the existing customers leaving. So it's playing with all those levers to understand the best and most efficient way that you can make all of those things happen.
Yeah, really, really interesting. If you were to kind of, I suppose, distill maybe 2 or 3 key themes that you see that are applicable from the smallest upstarts of the startups that come into you guys versus the likes of the WH Smiths, is there 2 or 3 kind of key aspects that they require from a data analytics perspective that really, I suppose, helps them get the most from their business? Because I just see it time and time again with a lot of businesses that they come to us and they think they're data driven, and when you get down to the nuts and bolts of it, data driven, it's thrown around, it's bandied around, it's a term nowadays, and there's very much levels to it, if you get what I'm saying.
So there's a couple of really easy ones. The first one is not many people properly understand their return on investment. And that sounds a slightly provocative thing to say, but what I mean by that is not many people understand the incremental benefit of each of the activities they're running on top of each other. So if you're investing in Google and Meta and maybe doing a bit of TV and doing a bit of display and have got some affiliate advertising working, how do you know which of those is actually driving the revenue? You can trust a platform measurement, but we all know that, and I'd be in the same place if I were them, platforms are going to try and overstate their revenue as much as possible to try and incentivize you to spend more in that platform. You can try and tie it all up into one place using maybe Google Analytics, but Google Analytics is likely going to be on Google's side rather than anyone else's. And anything that works on anything that had historically worked on a last click basis, I know you can look at many different bases of measurement in GA4 now, but anything that's worked on that basis historically is a little bit difficult. And then the attribution or attributed sales measurements that they have in Google are very black box based and difficult to unpick and don't necessarily cope well with having any offline marketing channels if you have any of those at all. So there are that's the first one. How do I understand if I spend an extra £10 in Facebook, what it's going to return to me? So that's one. The second one is, and all e-com brands should know this because it's one of the most important metrics, is what's my contribution per new customer into the business, or what's my cost per new customer into the business, and what's that future customer value after 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. So you've got a real understanding of the profitability of every new customer you bring into the business, not just at the point at which you bring them in, but over time. So you get to make investment decisions on, am I prepared to invest in promotional and marketing spend in order to engage customers in the brand in the first place, and then take advantage of the profit I'm going to make from those customers later on. So am I prepared to lose money up front in order to grow my customer base in order to make more profit over the longer term? So that kind of customer acquisition to lifetime value ratio that people bang on about, that people tend to scoop up into, well, my business CAC to lifetime value ratio is that's irrelevant. What is it in Facebook? And actually, more importantly, what is it in Facebook on customers who spend £100 versus customers who spend £50? And more importantly, what is it in Facebook on customers who spend £100 who shop in category X versus category Y? So it's being really granular about that understanding, so that you can say, I want in this business to recruit more customers on a Sunday into category X who are male from the north of England, who spend over £100, who buy 3 items. Being really clear about who you're trying to bring into the business and make sure that those customers are going to drive the highest future value from it.
Really interesting stuff there. I know there's a lot of e-commerce listeners probably tearing their hair out saying e-commerce is an easy business, but we'll come back to it.
I've definitely sat in their shoes. I know that actually running it is really challenging, but the fundamentals of it are relatively straightforward.
You touched on a couple of interesting points there, particularly around incrementality and contribution margin. I mean, incrementality, we'll probably come back to it in a second, but it's the buzzword at the moment. I mean, post iOS 14, those customer acquisition costs have really gone through the roof. And again, getting to that contribution margin and that CAC to LTV ratio. One problem I see with a lot of business owners is, that definition on what LTV stands for. And like, they come to us, and a lot of the time they come to Store Hero and say, look, we have our CAC to LTV and we know what our LTV model looks like. And you did start digging into the V component of that LTV, and it's done on a pure revenue basis, often including VAT. And I mean, if you're trying to build your business based on these foundations, like I often say, building an e-commerce business, like it's like building a house. You need to build the foundations, and the structure needs to be in place to scale the business properly. But if you're coming in with wrong data and you think you have a CAC to LTV of X, but you're actually building that LTV model on revenue as opposed to actual derived value from that customer, you're going to end up with more of a Leaning Tower of Pisa as opposed to a well-structured high-rise apartment.
Yeah, so I try and avoid the term lifetime value. And the reason for that is I don't think any of us know the lifetime value of our customer. Because for almost all businesses, there are still customers shopping now who were shopping at the outset of the business when the business first started. And that was true of when I was at Direct Wines that had been going 20 plus years at that point. There were still customers there. So lifetime, I think, is a challenging word. I try and use future customer value because you can put a time frame on that. You can say, how much my customer's going to go, how much profit are my customers going to make me in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months. And then it's just a case of deciding what my cash situation and what my attitude to risk is. So how much of that am I prepared to invest in advance in order to bring new customers into the business? And how much of that can I afford to invest in advance? So how much money have I got in the bank to enable me to do that? But certainly the value calculation for me should be a contribution to overheads number. So that is X VAT revenue less returns minus margin minus cost of fulfillment, minus an assumed ongoing marketing cost. Now, I get there's a whole load of assumptions in there. You don't know what your margin's going to be in a year and a half's time. I'd rather have an assumption in there than nothing. So I'm very happy to build it around assumptions. You can then flex those assumptions and say, well, we know that we've got a real program on to increase our margin, intake margin over the next 2 years by 3.5%. Fine, you can write that into your model going forwards, but start with some assumptions because assumptions really will help.
And test those assumptions for sure.
Oh, yes. I mean, come back to them on every 3 to 6 months and say, is my fulfillment cost really £3.98 per order, or whatever your fulfillment cost might be, and does that still hold true? Am I making that more efficient, less efficient? Particularly as you expand and change ranges, have I bought in a whole load of products that are two-man handling that are £7, £8, £25 each to send, and how does that all work?
Absolutely. Okay, going back to your first point there on incrementality, I suppose post iOS 14, that dirty word attribution, it's, it's murky. Is it who's telling the truth? Everybody's trying to claim credit for the same sale. You log into log into Facebook, and you have 100k attributed from Facebook this month. You have 100k attributed from Google, and you log into your Shopify or your WooCommerce dashboard, and you see 150k, and you're like, well, this doesn't stack up. I know I'm getting definitely some in through organic channels as well. So I suppose, even to touch on incrementality, we see so much of it online now at the moment. People are often confused by it. A lot of operators I speak to, they're very much confused by even what it actually means. Is this another term I need to try and figure out for my business? I just want to run my business. I don't want to have to understand every minor change Facebook or Apple make and how that affects my business. Would you be able to kind of give a high level overview in terms of what actually incrementality actually is?
Yes, I hope. So I think when you look at it from a high level, what you're trying to say, and it goes back to the question I gave earlier, is if I put £100 more into any one channel, how much would that increase my revenue overall? So if I would spend £100 more in Facebook, Facebook will tell me they can turn that into £10,000. In reality, what does it really turn into uplift for the business? So that's what we're trying to understand. And that's all that incrementality is trying to do. The problem is all of us are advertising or marketing in multiple channels. So I'd imagine almost everyone watching this is certainly in Meta and Google. Sure. I'd be very surprised if most people aren't in an affiliate space as well. Almost everyone will be has an email platform that they're reading results from. On top of that, a number of you may well be using TikTok, may well be having some form of display marketing, either retargeting or pure cold. And then on top of that, some of the people will probably have PR, recommend a friend, all of those other channels. So, and what we know is when we add them up together, and every business I've ever worked in, this is true, when you add all of those platform responses together, you'll get something that is somewhere between 150 and 300 or 400% of your total revenue. So you need to work out a way to say, if every single channel is telling me to spend more because I'm really profitable in every single channel, how do we make that? What is actually the real life understanding of this, and how do we work that out? So if you think about it, if you were able to isolate 10,000 people in the UK and say they never see any of my search marketing, but they see everything else, then you'd be able to measure those 10,000 people against the rest of the UK. 10,000 probably too small. Those 10,000 against the rest of the UK and say, therefore, I lost 4% of revenue by not marketing to these people in the search environment. But search said to these people over here, it generated 12% of my total revenue. Well, we know that 12% is wrong. And we know, because these people haven't seen, the only difference that we've made to these people is not making them not see search marketing. We know that actually search marketing is only driving 4% of your entire revenue. So that means your platform is over-reporting times 3. So how do you turn that into real life? And that's when it starts to get a little more challenging, but it's still doable. So if you take search marketing and take it in exactly that same way that I was saying, that let's take some people and make them not see search marketing. Well, you can do that. So Google AdWords has the ability inside it for you to say, to select by location. So you can say, okay, I don't want to do any search advertising in the southwest of England. So I don't want to do anything west of Bristol. I don't want them to see any of my paid search advertising. Well, you can run that for a time and say, when I turn paid search off for the west of England relative to the rest of the country drops X%. Therefore, I know incrementally what I'm delivering or what my paid search is delivering. Now, you don't have to be as brutal as the whole of the southwest of England. You can do it on a city by city basis. So you can do Leeds versus Sheffield, or Manchester Liverpool, or Newcastle Sunderland, or Portsmouth Southampton. In fact, I like to think of it as think of great football derbies, and those are good towns to twin together. So you can certainly run that in a paid search environment and understand what if I cut my spend down here to zero, I continue my spend over here at the level it was before. How much has my spend reduced, and how much has my overall sales reduced? Revenue per customer, number of new customers, all of those metrics that you'll be bringing into your business. And then you can say the platform said I was generating 10 grand. By taking it away, I only lost £5,000. Therefore, I know my platform is overcooking to a multiple of 2. What you can actually see is that can go the other way round. So certainly on some of the slightly more, I challenge myself to call shopping slightly more upper funnel, but compared to brand search, it's slightly more upper funnel. We've seen on Google Shopping, for example, that it actually underreports itself. So if you just turn off Google Shopping, it'll say you've lost a 5 grand, but actually you've lost £7,000 or £8,000 because that Google Shopping turns into brand searches, or turns into organic searches, or turns into direct traffic, or turns into something else. So you can certainly see it work both ways. You can certainly see your platform under and over reporting the effectiveness of its channel.
Really good point. And one piece we tend to look at with a lot of brands is, yes, obviously trying to measure that incrementality on a revenue level. But I often see a lot of e-com brands chasing revenue metrics, and it can lead to perverse incentives for whoever's responsible for the marketing budget. You know, we're going to hit 3 million this year, and it's November and we haven't done it, and we start pushing the hell out of paid marketing and we start discounting to get there. And what you can end up is just with the fun has been sucked out of the business. All the profit that the business owner had originally intended to make gets sucked out. So what we tend to look at really is trying to get the balance between, okay, I want to increase my ad spend. I obviously care about my revenue going up, but really what I need to focus on is maximizing that contribution margin piece, so that net sales minus full COGS minus full marketing. So as we scale spend, we're not just increasing revenue, but we're just making sure that, yes, revenue going up is going to be a byproduct of it in most cases, but you're going to reach that kind of point of almost diminishing marginal returns where you're going to spend more, you'll get more revenue, but actually you'll be a little bit worse off for it.
Yeah, potentially. So certainly the reason for wanting to work out what the real revenue loss is to work out what is an incremental return on ad spend. So Google platform will tell you what your return on ad spend is. And if Google's telling you it's 5 to 1, and we think Google is overcooking its results times 2, as I said earlier, we actually know that what you're really getting is a return on ad spend from Google. So your incremental return on ad spend is only 2.5 to 1. And assuming you can then apply margin calculations there, or even assumed margin calculations, you can get to a contribution really easily. So yes, it's allowing us to use platforms, because platforms are really useful. They give you near real-time reporting. They help you understand as you push and move levers. It helps you understand what you're gaining and what you're losing. The problem is you need to be able to overlay kind of at an instant in your head. Great, if Google's saying that's 5 to 1, it's 2.5 to 1. Great, I can carry on doing it. If 2.5 to 1 is acceptable to your business. Or Google saying 10 to 1, it's actually 5 to 1. I can definitely carry on doing it. So it's having a quick and easy conversion in your head that allows you to get to a allows you to continue using platforms, because platforms are really important, and continues to allow you to use platform metrics, but having in the back of your mind an kind of instant, always on. What does that really mean? What's that in an incremental world? And how confident am I about that? And there's pretty much no channel that you can't do incremental testing on. I say pretty much no channel because I've always struggled on affiliate marketing. Incremental testing on affiliates is really hard. There are ways and means, but it's challenging. And spend on PR and influencer marketing is very, very difficult to incrementally test. But pretty much all your other channels, it's doable.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think this has really come to the forefront for D2C in the last 3-4 years as a result of, I suppose, pre-COVID, CAC and ROAS was incredible for most people online. Then all of a sudden COVID came and everybody came online to compete for that same media budget. And then all of a sudden iOS 14 came in, and not only had you increased competition, but you had more difficult conditions in which to target those existing customers you would have done beforehand. So the need to really model out and really understand almost that sweet spot, trying to find that point of diminishing marginal returns, has never been more important for businesses. And having I suppose, goes in tandem with having a real fundamental understanding of what the unit economics of your business actually look like. And I suppose to start looking at incrementality, and you kind of touched on the tons of different ways to measure it. I suppose the two I typically tend to see is kind of holdout testing and MMM, media mix modeling. Would they be two kind of large pieces that you tend to look at? We're not going to go into detail on either of them, but it'd be kind of interesting to hear your thoughts.
Yes, I find the other one I think about is econometric modelling, but you need big slugs of cash to get into that field. You can spend. I have worked with people who've spent more than £1 million creating that kind of modelling environment. So let's take that one out the picture for a while. I think MMM is great as long as you can feed all the inputs in as accurately as it needs. And that gets really difficult when you're doing any offline marketing at all. So feeding TV into that is challenging. Feeding press advertising, feeding catalog marketing, that's really challenging. I also think it gives you it almost gives you a slightly black box understanding as to what your outcomes are. Whereas full incrementality testing will allow you to test the MMM model. So that's what I tend to do is, what I've tended to do is, if we're working with an MMM model to begin with, is to effectively stress test that model and say, now let's do some incrementality testing and see how robust that modeling is. And when I take activities away, when I do the holdout testing, how robust does the MMM modeling hold up, and does it tell the same story? Because holdout testing is, while definitely not perfect, and I can get onto the problems with that in a minute, it is the most accurate way we have of measuring incremental uplift at the moment. It's slightly faffy to run, and you've got to run it across every single channel separately, and you probably have to run it once every 12 months, 18 months to ensure it's up to date and accurate. However, the level of accuracy it gives you is more robust than anything else that most businesses of a sub 30 million size can afford to do.
No, that's brilliant information there. And I suppose one thing we're always trying to find businesses, and it's really, really difficult, is trying to get to that sweet spot of that efficiency piece where you're trying to, I suppose, a lot of businesses I see are obviously overspending on their paid media, but there's actually more, to be honest, David, that are underspending, and they're underspending often because there's a fundamental understanding of the core unit economics of the business, and they actually don't understand how much they could probably push that paid spend a little bit further. Yep. And it's a really difficult to, suppose, plot that degradation curve. Okay, we're going to try and treble our paid marketing budget this next year, and trying to come up with some estimate in terms of what the degradation of that marketing efficiency is going to be, modeling out, is really, really difficult for brands.
You don't have to model it necessarily. So when I've talked about incremental testing, there's no reason to stop you next week spending an extra 10%, 20%, 30% in 4 cities. So doing the reverse of incremental testing, which is isolating 4 cities and what we term surge testing it. There's probably a more accurate term somewhere, but testing acceleration into those places and looking therefore what's the incremental gain against the incremental cost that gives you so to get another 10% of customers, what are they going to cost me at the margin? Because the problem is, if you look at, your cost of acquisition, let's say your marketing cost of acquisition now is 30 quid per each customer. Let's say you accelerate hard and add 10% more customers and that becomes 35. Almost certainly that means the ones at the margin are costing about 60 quid because the first customers you were recruiting before are still costing the same amount they were before. So understanding that incremental cost of those new customers, rather than just how much does that increase it overall, helps you understand, can we afford to spend in that space against and we go back to the CAC to future customer value, against our future customer value we're going to be taking from those customers.
Brilliant.
And one thing we found historically to kind of always be true is that future customer value is really predictable at a cohort level, and an individual customer level. But at any given cohort level, within 30 days, you should be able to predict their future customer value reasonably accurately, assuming you're selling something that is vaguely consumable. It's a little bit more difficult when you're only selling beds, or if you're only selling, occasional purchase items. But anything that's vaguely consumable or vaguely repeat buyable, then certainly we see that they are hugely predictive after a really quite short amount of time.
Yeah, no, really, really good insight there. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to do it. Kind of maybe try it on a couple of different cities as opposed to going after a full country and doing that surge testing as you kind of mentioned there.
Yeah, I mean, very few people can afford to just say, let's double our social marketing spend and see what that does. And the problem is if you take it in small steps, which is what most of us normally do. You go, well, I'm currently spending £5,000 a month on paid, 10 grand a month on paid social. Let's make that 11, and then 12, and then 13. The problem is you never really understand what those incremental chunks are doing for you, because you can never really understand what 10% more spend over the whole of the UK is delivering for you and how. Whereas taking that and putting it in a much smaller space helps you understand really quite quickly what that incremental cost of acquisition looks like.
Brilliant. And I suppose we'll wrap with one more question. If you were to give one piece of advice to an e-commerce brand to maybe get the biggest unlock from a data analytics perspective from your years of working in the industry, maybe what's the one big unlock you can bring to customers that they say, oh my God, wow, this is fantastic. Is there any key learnings or lessons, or is there one good thing everybody should be doing?
I'll do a couple because I'm greedy. If you don't really, really solidly understand your contribution value of customers over time as a ratio of your marketing spend, as a ratio of your contribution at point of intake, do that and understand and model that out and understand therefore how the overall metrics of the business work. It's astonishing how many people I work with who have either under or overplayed their hand because they haven't fully understood how long it takes for that money to repay. I started working with one brand relatively recently who were making £20 profit per new customer they brought into the business, and they hadn't really understood that, because all they'd ever really looked at was the marketing cost of acquisition, not the profitability at the point of acquisition, which led them to accelerate very much faster than they had been doing. So that's a case of classic underspend in that area. there is almost no brand that can't that can't accelerate that to break even and grow a bigger, more profitable brand over time. So it's understanding that basic dynamic and how those basic numbers add up. The second one is, having spent a lot of time talking about channels, is don't over channel focus. Try and make your metrics and how you measure your business significantly more customer centric. So understand how your customers are performing to the combined sum of your marketing activity, rather than how each of your marketing activities are laddering up to make your customer respond. So customer down rather than campaign up.
Very interesting. That's really, really good advice. Really, really good advice. And again, I just go back to that point you kind of touched on earlier on in the podcast. I think years of the cheap ads on Facebook just meant people didn't really need to have this stuff under lock and key. And now all of a sudden everybody realizes that this is ultimately the most important part of the business. We need to make sure that we're buying customers at an affordable clip, that we have cash and we know when they're going to come back, and that we very much have that dialed down to a fine art, because there's no real room for ambiguity anymore on those numbers. No. David, if our customers, if anyone listening would love to find you, where can they connect with you?
So David Lockwood, Tapster Agency on LinkedIn, tapsteragency.com website. Generally find us on LinkedIn, the Tapster Agency. We're pretty easy to find, and we have a slightly boisterous pink logo.
David Lockwood, thank you very much. That was a brilliant episode. I hope everyone got a lot from that. So thanks very much, and we'll chat to you again very soon.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Cool. Happy with that.